The warship floated in the void, a relic of an era long past. The Galactic Federation's finest admiral scoffed at its crude, outdated design. It was small, ugly, and painfully slow compared to the sleek, gravity-defying destroyers that filled the Federation's mighty fleets. To them, it was nothing more than a joke, a scrap heap barely worth the fuel it burned. Yet this so-called relic had a name: Indomitable. And Captain Elias Rourke knew that names mattered. The Federation had laughed when humanity first introduced its warship to the galactic stage. Compared to the advanced plasma shields, antimatter warheads, and hyper-precise targeting systems of alien fleets, the Indomitable was archaic. It relied on primitive, brute-force technology, massive tungsten slugs fired at ridiculous speeds, thick armor instead of energy shields, and a crew trained in resilience over automation. They called it inefficient. They called it primitive. They didn't understand. Humanity had spent centuries fighting wars with whatever they had, improvising, adapting, and finding new ways to kill with the crudest of tools. Every empire, every species, had its own doctrine. Some favored energy weapons, others used drones or AI-assisted warfare. But humans? Humans fought dirty. And now, war was coming. The Zelvok Dominion had declared war on the Federation, a brutal species of conquerors who had no use for prisoners or negotiations. Their fleets were vast, their technology terrifying. One by one, Federation worlds burned, their sleek, graceful warships shattered under the relentless advance of the Zelvok. Every battle ended the same way. Federation forces routed, their once mighty fleets reduced to wreckage, their admirals unable to comprehend why their superior technology was failing them. Rourke had watched the reports. He'd seen how the Zelvok exploited weaknesses, how they adapted faster than any species the Federation had ever faced. Their energy-based weapons fried delicate shield systems. Their ships outmaneuvered every automated targeting system. Their fighters disrupted enemy formations with vicious precision. The Federation was losing, and now they were desperate enough to call on the one thing they had mocked. Indomitable had been stationed at a remote outpost, forgotten and neglected. When Rourke got the call to join the war effort, he knew what it meant. They were running out of options. They were throwing everything they had at the enemy, even the ship they had once ridiculed. Fine. Let them laugh. As Indomitable jumped into the contested sector, surrounded by the broken husks of Federation ships, the Zelvok turned their weapons toward it, expecting an easy kill. They had no idea what was coming. The first volley from the Zelvok ships slammed into Indomitable's hull, but there were no shields to short out, no delicate systems to disrupt. The armor held, reinforced with layers of thick, primitive metals that absorbed the impact. Unlike the Federation ships, which relied on sophisticated energy redistribution, Indomitable had been built to take a beating and keep firing. And fire it did. The kinetic cannons roared to life, launching tungsten slugs at speeds so high that even the Zelvok's advanced defense systems couldn't react in time. One enemy destroyer crumpled like a tin can, its hull torn apart as raw kinetic energy shredded through it. Another ship's engines exploded, sending it spiraling into the wreckage of its allies. The Zelvok scrambled, trying to adjust their tactics. But they had never fought anything like this. Indomitable didn't fight like the Federation. It didn't use elegant formations or predictable strategies. It fought the way humans had always fought, ruthlessly, relentlessly, with a brutality that defied logic. The warship they had laughed at was now the only thing standing between them and total annihilation. And Captain Elias Rourke had no intention of letting them win. The Zelvok fleet hesitated for the first time. They had spent years studying the Federation's war doctrines, predictable, precise, and logical. Every Federation ship followed carefully programmed attack patterns. Every fleet engaged with a cold efficiency that was easy to counter. But Indomitable? It was chaos incarnate. The ship's massive railguns fired again, unleashing another barrage of hyper-accelerated slugs. One Zelvok battleship tried to maneuver away, but it was too slow. The first slug punched a hole straight through its hull, leaving a smoking, molten gap where its command center had been. A second slug followed, tearing through its reactor core. In an instant, the ship detonated in a violent explosion, sending debris scattering in all directions. Rourke grinned. "How's that for primitive?" he muttered. The Zelvok adapted quickly, their remaining ships breaking formation, trying to surround Indomitable. Plasma bolts and particle beams rained down, scorching the warship's hull. Unlike Federation ships, which relied on energy shields to absorb incoming fire, Indomitable took every hit head-on, shrugging off attacks like an old battleship from Earth's past wars. "Damage report," Rourke barked. "Armor's holding, Captain," Lieutenant Vega responded, her fingers flying across the control panels. "We've lost a few external sensors, but the hull integrity is still at 92%. "Good," Rourke said. "Keep firing. Aim for their engines. Cripple them before they can run." The gunners complied, unleashing another deadly salvo. One Zelvok cruiser tried to bank away, but a tungsten slug tore through its propulsion system, sending it tumbling helplessly through space. Another ship took a hit to its weapons array, its plasma cannons erupting in a chain reaction that engulfed half its hull. The Federation ships that had survived the initial assault, damaged and barely operational, watched in stunned silence. For years, they had been taught that kinetic weapons were outdated, that brute force had no place in modern warfare. Yet here was Indomitable, proving every tactical expert in the Federation wrong. "Captain Rourke," a voice crackled through the comms. It was Admiral Vren, the highest-ranking Federation officer still alive in the sector. "Your ship, what the hell is that thing?" Rourke smirked. "A warship," he said. "A real one." The Zelvok were in full retreat now, their surviving vessels breaking off and fleeing towards the outer edges of the system. They had underestimated the humans once. They would not make that mistake again. But Rourke wasn't done. "Helm," he ordered. "Pursue and destroy. No survivors." "Aye, Captain," Vega acknowledged. Indomitable's engines roared, propelling it forward with a force that made the deck tremble beneath their feet. Unlike the Federation ships, which relied on delicate energy fields for maneuvering, Indomitable had thrusters built for raw acceleration. The last Zelvok battleship, its hull smoking and its weapons failing, tried to make a final stand. It turned, charging its remaining plasma cannons for one desperate blast. Rourke's lips curled into a wolfish grin. "Fire!" The final kinetic round struck dead center. For a moment there was silence. Then the Zelvok ship exploded in a massive fireball, the shockwave rippling across the battlefield. The last of the Dominion fleet was gone. A deep, stunned silence settled over the comms. Then, slowly, a sound began to rise. Cheers, shouts of victory from the battered Federation crews who had thought this battle was lost. Rourke leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. The battle was over. But the war? It was just beginning. And this time, humanity wasn't going to fight by the Federation's rules. This time, they were going to fight their way. The aftermath of the battle left the battlefield littered with debris, broken Federation ships, charred Zelvok husks, and the lingering radiation of shattered reactors. Indomitable stood among the wreckage, scarred but victorious. Captain Elias Rourke surveyed the tactical screen. The Federation survivors were regrouping, scavenging what they could from the remains. The Zelvok, always arrogant in their superiority, had not expected to lose. This was the first time in the war that they had been outright beaten. The comms crackled to life again. Admiral Vren's voice carried a mix of exhaustion and something Rourke hadn't heard from a Federation officer in a long time. Respect. "Captain Rourke, we owe you our lives." Rourke smirked, but his voice remained cool. "You can thank me when this war is over, Admiral. If we don't change the way we fight, today's victory will mean nothing." There was a long pause. Then Vren sighed. "I won't argue with you. Whatever the Federation's been doing, it clearly hasn't worked." Another pause. "That ship of yours, Indomitable, it fights differently. It thinks differently." "That's because it wasn't designed by committees of bureaucrats," Rourke replied. "It was designed by people who know what war really is." Silence. Then, "We need more ships like yours, Captain." A lot more. Rourke had expected that. The Federation had dismissed human combat tactics for years, calling them inefficient and barbaric. But now, desperation was setting in. The Federation had always been built on the idea of technological and strategic superiority. But against an enemy like the Zelvok, who adapted, who learned, who exploited weakness, that superiority had crumbled. They needed a new strategy. Number. They needed human strategy. "Admiral," Rourke said, leaning forward, "if you're serious about this, I'm going to need more than a few new ships. I need full control over tactics and deployment. The Federation's way of war doesn't work. You let me fight my way, or we lose this war." Another silence, then a deep exhale. "I'll talk to High Command." Rourke knew what that meant. The bureaucrats would fight it. They wouldn't want to hand over control to some reckless human captain with an outdated warship. But they didn't have a choice. The war had changed. And Rourke was going to make sure humanity led the charge. "Set course for the nearest Federation shipyard," he ordered. "We're going to show them what real warships look like." As Indomitable turned, pushing its way through the wreckage, a single thought burned in Rourke's mind. Let them laugh. They wouldn't be laughing for long. The journey to the Federation shipyard was tense. The remaining Federation ships, battered and humiliated, followed Indomitable in silence. There were no official orders from High Command yet, no declarations of a new strategy, just the whispers spreading through the fleet. Rumors that a single, outdated human warship had turned the tide of battle. Rourke sat in his command chair, watching the hyperspace tunnel streak past on the main display. He knew how this would play out. The Federation had spent centuries building a war machine that was sleek, efficient, and, in their minds, unstoppable. Now that machine was failing, and the people in charge wouldn't want to admit they were wrong. "Captain, incoming transmission from the Federation shipyard," Vega reported. "High Command is demanding an immediate debriefing." Rourke grunted. "Put them through." The holoscreen flickered to life, revealing an aging, sharp-faced man with a uniform that looked like it had never seen a battlefield. Admiral Kaslor, one of the Federation's senior strategists, the type of officer who had spent more time in meetings than in combat. "Captain Rourke," Kaslor began, his tone clipped. "I've read the reports. I'm struggling to understand how your vessel, an outdated human relic, was able to outfight the Zelvok." Rourke leaned forward. "We won because Indomitable wasn't built by a committee that prioritizes aesthetics over survivability." Kaslor's lips tightened. "That ship of yours lacks shields. It lacks energy-based weaponry. It is a brute force design in an age of precision warfare. You're telling me it worked?" "You saw the results, Admiral." Kaslor's expression darkened. "It was a fluke. The Zelvok were unprepared for such primitive tactics. If they adapt—" "They will adapt," Rourke cut in. "That's the whole damn point. They've adapted to every strategy the Federation has thrown at them. That's why you're losing. but what they haven't adapted to is human warfare. Kaslor scoffed. Human warfare? You mean your people's obsession with brutality? Rourke smirked. I mean fighting to win, Admiral. The Federation fights by rules. Humans fight to survive. Kaslor hesitated. He wasn't used to being challenged, but Rourke could see the doubt creeping in. High Command is not ready to embrace this kind of thinking, Kaslor finally said. But given the state of the war, they are willing to consider modifications to our fleet doctrine. Rourke shook his head. Modifications won't cut it. You need an entirely new fleet. You need Indomitable-class warships, ships built for real combat, not for parade formations. You need human captains who understand war for what it really is. Kaslor remained silent for a long moment. Then, finally, I'll take your recommendations to the Council. But understand, Captain, if this backfires, your name will be remembered as the greatest failure in Federation history. Rourke grinned. Or the man who saved it. The transmission cut out. Vega exhaled. Think they'll actually listen? Rourke stared at the empty screen. They don't have a choice. Outside, the shipyard loomed, a massive construction hub where the Federation's finest warships were built. But Rourke wasn't here for their designs. He was here to build something new, something human. And when the Zelvok came back, they wouldn't be facing Federation warships anymore. They'd be facing monsters. The Federation shipyard was a monument to its philosophy. Sleek, pristine, and soulless. Thousands of pristine warships lined the vast docking bays, their hulls reflecting the artificial light in shimmering perfection. To the Federation, these ships represented the pinnacle of advanced warfare. To Rourke, they were little more than fragile glass sculptures waiting to be shattered. As Indomitable approached the docking ring, the crew could feel the weight of hundreds of eyes on them. Fleet personnel, engineers, and officers all stopped to stare at the battered, outdated warship limping into port. They had heard the stories. The ship they had laughed at, the relic they had mocked, had done what their finest fleets could not. Rourke stepped off the boarding ramp, his boots echoing against the metallic flooring as he and his officers made their way toward the command center. Waiting for him was Admiral Kaslor, flanked by several other high-ranking Federation officials. Some wore expressions of curiosity. Others barely concealed disdain. Captain Rourke, Kaslor greeted him, his tone unreadable. Welcome to Zenith Shipyard. You've certainly caused a stir. Rourke smirked. Figured the Federation could use a wake-up call. Kaslor's expression hardened. You've been granted an audience with the War Council. They want to hear your proposals. Rourke's smirk didn't fade. Good. Let's get started. The War Council's chamber was an immense circular room with a massive holographic display at its center. Generals, admirals, and bureaucrats filled the seats, all watching as Rourke stepped forward. A high-ranking official, Chancellor Varus, leaned forward. Captain Rourke, you stand here today not as a hero, but as an anomaly. Your ship, an outdated, inefficient, and crude piece of human engineering, has somehow managed to win a battle where our finest fleets have failed. We want to know how. Rourke folded his arms. Simple. Your fleets rely too much on technology and predictability. The Zelvok know your playbook better than you do. They counter your formations before you even commit to them. They expect you to fight like the Federation. He stepped closer to the hologram, adjusting the display to show the wreckage from the last battle. They didn't expect Indomitable, Rourke continued. They didn't expect a ship that doesn't rely on delicate shield systems, that shrugs off their energy weapons with brute force armor. They didn't expect kinetic weaponry, which bypasses their countermeasures entirely. And they sure as hell didn't expect a crew that fights dirty. He turned back to the Council. The Federation fights like it's playing a chess match, But war isn't chess. War is a brawl. And humans? We brawl better than anyone. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. Some of the officials were visibly uncomfortable, others intrigued. Chancellor Vera studied him carefully. "So what do you propose, Captain?" Rourke's grin widened. This was the moment he had been waiting for. "You give me full authority to design a new fleet, indomitable-class warships, ships built with kinetic weapons, thick armor, and human war doctrine. No more of this elegant, fragile nonsense. We fight like warriors, not bureaucrats. We build ships to win." The room exploded into debate. Some officers immediately protested, calling the idea reckless and outdated. Others, particularly those who had survived recent battles, argued in favor of it. Finally, Kaslor raised a hand, silencing the chamber. He looked at Rourke, his gaze sharp. "One ship proving itself in a single battle does not justify an entire shift in doctrine," Kaslor said. "We need proof that your tactics will work on a larger scale, that your brute force approach isn't just a fluke." Rourke nodded. "Then give me a test fleet. 10 ships, no restrictions, no oversight from your committees. Let me show you what humanity can really do." Kaslor glanced at Varys, who exchanged a long look with the other officials. Then the Chancellor spoke. "You'll get 5, she said. "No more." Rourke smirked. 5 will do." As the meeting concluded, Rourke stepped out of the chamber, Vega at his side. "Think they'll actually back us?" she asked. "They don't have a choice," Rourke replied, looking out at the shipyard. "Because the next time the Zelvok attack, we won't just fight them." He clenched his fists. "We'll make them fear us." The shipyard's construction bays, once filled with sleek and delicate Federation cruisers, were now home to something new, something terrifying. Rourke stood on the observation deck, arms crossed as he watched the first of the Indomitable-class warships take shape. They were ugly by Federation standards, thick hulls of reinforced composite alloys, heavy-set designs with no wasted space, and railgun batteries mounted like jagged teeth along their flanks. They weren't built for maneuverability or grace. They were built to kill. Behind him, Admiral Kaslor approached, his face a mask of controlled skepticism. "You got your warships, Captain," Kaslor said. "Now what?" Rourke smirked. "Now we test them the only way that matters, in combat." Kaslor's lips thinned. "We don't have the luxury of time. The Zelvok will return, and when they do, they'll come in force." "Good," Rourke said. "That means we won't have to go looking for them." Kaslor exhaled through his nose. "I don't like this. The Federation has rules, Captain. We don't fight like barbarians." Rourke turned to him, his grin fading. "Then you'd better hope your rules don't get us all killed." Kaslor said nothing. The construction continued at a breakneck pace. The Federation, desperate for results, allocated every available resource to the project. Within weeks, the 5 warships were operational. Each bore the same brutal design as Indomitable. Thick plating, oversized kinetic weapons, and redundant systems that ensured they could take a beating and keep fighting. Rourke handpicked their crews, bringing in humans and battle-hardened Federation officers willing to throw out old doctrine. He drilled them relentlessly, forcing them to unlearn the pristine, careful tactics they had been taught, and embrace something more brutal, more human. When the Zelvok returned, they came with an armada. Over 50 warships, more than enough to wipe out the remaining Federation defenses. Their confidence was absolute. They had won every battle before this. They didn't realize they weren't fighting the same Federation anymore. The new fleet deployed, with Indomitable at the helm. As the enemy ships came into range, the Zelvok transmitted their usual demand for surrender. Rourke responded with a railgun barrage. Tungsten slugs punched through Zelvok hulls like paper, shattering warships in seconds. The enemy scrambled, trying to return fire, but their plasma weapons splashed harmlessly against the reinforced armor of the Indomitable-class ships. The battle wasn't just a victory, it was a slaughter. By the time the last Zelvok ship tried to retreat, only a handful of them remained. Rourke let them go. He wanted survivors. He wanted the Zelvok to spread the word. Humanity wasn't just fighting back. They were winning. Kasler watched the aftermath in stunned silence. "My God," he whispered, "we can actually beat them." Rourke turned to him, eyes cold. "We were always able to. You just didn't have the stomach for it." Kasler swallowed. He knew Rourke was right. The Federation had tried to win the war with rules. Humanity had won with war. And the Zelvok? They had just learned what it meant to fear humans. The Zelvok retreated, their once mighty armada reduced to scattered wreckage drifting through the void. The battlefield was silent, except for the crackling remnants of their shattered ships. The Federation had never seen a victory like this. Overwhelming, brutal, and absolute. But Rourke knew better than to celebrate. On the bridge of Indomitable, the crew stood in stunned silence, the reality of what they had just done sinking in. The Federation had spent years losing battle after battle, watching their worlds burn. Now, in a single engagement, 5 human-designed warships had shattered an invasion force 10 times their size. It wasn't just a victory, it was a message. Vega turned to Rourke, her face unreadable. "They ran. We actually made them run." Rourke nodded. "And that scares them more than losing." The Zelvok had never retreated before. Their entire species thrived on conquest, on domination. They never encountered an enemy that didn't crumble before them. Until now, Kaslor's image flickered onto the holoscreen. For once, the Admiral had no criticisms, no doubts, only the look of a man who had just seen everything he believed in shattered. "You did it," he said, almost in disbelief. "They were slaughtered. They had no chance." "They'll be back," Rourke said flatly, "and next time, they won't underestimate us." Kasler hesitated. The Federation High Council has already seen the battle reports. They're divided. Some want to commission more Indomitable-class ships immediately. Others are concerned. Rourke scoffed. "Concerned about what? Winning?" Kasler exhaled, rubbing his temples. "Concerned that your methods are too brutal, that we risk losing our identity if we embrace human warfare." Rourke's expression darkened. "Our identity? We were losing this war. Our identity was about to be extinction." Kasler sighed. "I agree with you, but you're dealing with politicians, not soldiers." Rourke clenched his fists. He had seen this before, leaders who refused to accept reality until it was too late. The Federation still didn't understand. But the Zelvok did. Rourke turned to Vega. "Get me a tactical scan of their retreat path." She nodded, working quickly. A red trajectory appeared on the holomap, leading to a system at the edge of contested space. "That's their nearest forward operating base," Vega said. "Heavily fortified, but we could hit it before they reinforce." Kasler's eyes widened. "You're suggesting an attack? We just won a battle, Captain. You want to provoke them further?" "They're already provoked," Rourke said. "Right now they're afraid. If we wait, they'll regroup, adapt, and come back stronger. But if we hit them again, if we keep hitting them, we break them before they recover." Kasler hesitated, but Rourke saw something different in his eyes this time. It wasn't doubt, it was fear, not of the Zelvok, of him. Kasler swallowed. "I'll inform the Council." Rourke turned back to the holographic map, his mind already 3 steps ahead. The Zelvok had just learned to fear humanity. Now, it was time to teach them what true terror felt like. The Zelvok forward base loomed on the holo display, a fortress nestled in the asteroid fields of the Kelrath system. It was a stronghold, a staging ground for their invasions, and the last place they would expect the Federation, no, humans, to strike first. On the bridge of Indomitable, Captain Rourke studied the enemy defenses. Dozens of warships, automated turrets, reinforced stations. A direct assault would be suicide. Good. He thrived on impossible odds. Vega stood beside him, arms crossed. I assume you have a plan that isn't just charge in and start shooting? Rourke smirked. Oh, we're absolutely going to charge in and start shooting, but not the way they expect. Kasler's voice came through the comms, laced with frustration. Captain Rourke, the Federation High Council has not approved this offensive. You're acting without authorization. Rourke barely glanced at the screen. Noted. You could be court-martialed for this, Kasler snapped. Then I guess you'd better hope we win, Rourke replied, because if we don't, none of this will matter anyway. Kasler's mouth opened to argue, but he hesitated. He wasn't a fool. He knew that every delay, every committee meeting, only gave the Zelvok more time to prepare. And deep down, Rourke knew. The Admiral wanted him to be right. Kasler sighed. You have 5 ships, against an entire Zelvok stronghold. Tell me how you plan to make this work. Rourke's grin widened. Like this. He turned to his crew. Helm, take us in at quarter speed. I want them to see us coming. Vega frowned. You want them to prepare? I want them to get cocky, Rourke corrected. They'll assume we're another foolish Federation force trying a conventional assault. They'll organize their defenses accordingly. Kasler listened in silence as the 5 Indomitable-class warships crawled toward the Zelvok base. As expected, the enemy fleet surged forward, forming a tight, overlapping defensive formation. They were setting up for a standard Federation engagement, expecting precise formations, delicate tactics. They still hadn't learned. Now, Rourke said, full burn. Straight through the asteroid field. The helmsman's eyes widened, but he followed the order. The fleet accelerated, moving erratically through the dense asteroid belt surrounding the stronghold. The Federation never used asteroid fields, too unpredictable, too dangerous for their delicate ships. But Indomitable-class ships weren't delicate. The Zelvok hesitated. Their targeting systems struggled to lock on as massive tungsten slugs bounced off asteroids, ricocheting unpredictably. Enemy ships fired, but plasma bolts struck floating debris instead of their targets. Then, at the last possible moment, fire all railguns, Rourke ordered. The Zelvok never stood a chance. Tungsten slugs, traveling at near relativistic speeds, tore through their warships before they could react. Ships cracked apart, their hulls shredded. Explosions bloomed in the void as Zelvok vessels turned to run. But Rourke wasn't here to let them escape. Pursue and eliminate, he said coldly. No survivors. The Federation had spent this war retreating, defending, surviving. Rourke was here to end it. The battle was over in minutes. The fortress, once an impenetrable bastion, lay in ruins. Every Zelvok ship was destroyed, every defense obliterated. For the first time in history, the Zelvok had lost more than just a battle. They had lost their fearlessness. Kasler's voice came through the comms, quiet and shaken. My God, you actually did it! Rourke exhaled. And this is just the beginning. He turned to Vega. Prepare a message. We're broadcasting this to every Federation world, every human world. She nodded. What do you want it to say? Rourke's eyes burned with something dangerous. Tell them we're taking the war to the Zelvok. Tell them it's time to stop running. He stepped forward, looking out at the burning wreckage. And tell them humanity just took its first step toward dominating the stars. The message spread like wildfire. Across the Federation, across every human world, across every battle-scarred colony that had been told to cower in fear. Rourke's words ignited something that had long been buried beneath layers of bureaucracy and defeat. Hope. Not the passive, fragile kind the Federation clung to. The kind that hoped the enemy might show mercy, that prayed for a peace that would never come. This was something raw, something human, a hunger for revenge. On the bridge of Indomitable, Rourke watched the reports come in. The reaction was immediate. Human officers in the Federation fleet, long frustrated by the cowardice of their commanders, were requesting transfers to his ships. Engineers were already modifying existing warships, stripping away the delicate failing systems in favor of brutal, human-designed firepower. Civilian shipyards were converting freighters into makeshift battleships. The Federation, as Rourke knew it, was already dead. And from its ashes, a human war machine was rising. "Captain," Vega called from the comms station, her voice sharp. "We've got incoming transmissions, multiple sources." Rourke nodded. "Patch them through." The main holoscreen flickered to life. Chancellor Varys appeared first, her expression unreadable. Next to her was Caslor, his jaw set, his posture stiff. Varys spoke first. "Captain Rourke, do you have any idea what you've done?" He leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. "Yeah, I just turned the tide of this war." Her eyes narrowed. "You defied direct orders. You launched an unsanctioned attack on a Zelvok stronghold. You broadcast unauthorized messages across the Federation. And now we have protests, riots, military units refusing orders." "Because they know the truth," Rourke interrupted. "Your war was lost until I changed the way we fought. The Federation's been losing for years because it refused to face reality. But now..." He gestured at the holo display, where images of humans rallying to his call flickered across the screen. "Now, we're finally fighting to win." Caslor spoke next, his voice carefully measured. "The Council is divided. Many of them see the necessity of your actions, but others fear what you're becoming." Rourke smirked. "And what do you think, Admiral?" Caslor hesitated. Then, for the first time, he dropped the mask. "I think you're the only reason we're still alive." Varys shot him a sharp look but said nothing. Instead, she exhaled and leaned forward. "The Council will never approve full-scale war on the Zelvok. They still want peace. They need peace." "Peace?" Rourke scoffed. "The Zelvok don't do peace. They either conquer or destroy. You know what they'll do if they win this war. You know what happens to every species they've ever beaten." Varys didn't argue. She knew he was right. "So," Rourke continued, "here's how this is going to go. You're going to give me full authority over every human-led military unit in this war. You're going to approve the expansion of the Indomitable-class fleet, and you're going to let me do what needs to be done." Caslor let out a slow breath. "And if we don't?" Rourke's eyes were cold. "Then I do it anyway." Silence. Varys studied him carefully. "You're not just trying to win this war, are you?" Rourke leaned forward, his voice calm, his words sharp as a knife. "I'm trying to make sure humanity never has to fight for its survival again." Varys closed her eyes for a moment. Then, when she opened them, she looked at Caslor and nodded. "Do what you have to do, Captain." The transmission cut out. Vega exhaled. "We just took control of the entire human war effort." Rourke stared at the holomap, his mind already turning. The Zelvok were reeling, but they wouldn't stay that way. Their empire stretched across dozens of systems, their war machine still vast. But now, so was his. "Good," he said. "Then let's get to work." Because this wasn't just about beating the Zelvok. This was about sending a message to the entire galaxy, a message written in fire, steel, and blood. Humanity would never be underestimated again. The war didn't end with one battle, nor even a dozen. The Zelvok were wounded, but they were not broken. Not yet. But humanity had changed. Under Rourke's command, the Federation's human forces abandoned the old doctrines and embraced something new, something brutal. The Indomitable-class warships became the backbone of a relentless, unstoppable offensive. No longer did humans fight for survival. Now, they fought for domination. One by one, Zelvok strongholds fell. Their fleets, once considered invincible, shattered under the relentless barrage of kinetic firepower. They tried to adapt, but the humans were always a step ahead. Every time the Zelvok developed a countermeasure, Rourke and his forces changed the game again. Gone were the predictable, delicate battles of the old Federation. Now, war was fought the human way. Entire Zelvok systems burned. Planets they had once ruled with iron fists now lay in ruins, their people forced to flee before the relentless tide of human vengeance. For the first time in their history, the Zelvok were not the conquerors. They were the conquered. And when the war finally reached their homeworld, when Rourke's fleet surrounded the Zelvok capital and prepared for the final strike, the once mighty species begged for peace. But humanity remembered. They remembered the colonies that had burned. They remembered the families slaughtered. They remembered what it was like to be seen as weak, as prey. So when the Zelvok pleaded for a treaty, for mercy, Rourke gave them his answer. The Indomitable fired the first shot, and humanity never had to fight for survival again. Because now, the galaxy feared them, and they never laughed at a human warship again. The stars burned cold and indifferent above the fleet of the Ascendants, their shimmering hulls cutting through the void like blades of divine light. They called themselves gods, and for millennia, no one had dared to disagree. Their empire spanned galaxies, their will enforced by ships that could crack planets open like eggshells, their voices echoing through subspace as if the universe itself knelt to listen. They were beautiful, flawless, eternal. Or so they thought. That was before the Erebus arrived. It started with a ripple, a faint distortion in the fabric of space that their sensors barely registered. The Ascendant Fleet, 5 majestic dreadnoughts, each a monument to their supremacy, hovered above the ruined husk of Kylara, a backwater world they'd reduced to ash for daring to defy their tithe. The airwaves still crackled with the last screams of its people, a sound the Ascendants savored like music. High Lord Zeresh stood on the bridge of the light of divinity, his silver eyes glowing faintly as he surveyed the smoldering wreckage below. His voice, smooth as silk and sharp as a blade, broke the silence. "Let this be a lesson," he said, his words broadcast to every ship in the fleet. "Defiance is a privilege mortals cannot afford." The crew murmured their agreement, their faces serene, their minds untroubled by the slaughter. To them, this was justice, the natural order of a universe shaped by their hands. They were beyond guilt, beyond doubt, until the ripple became a tear, and the tear became a shadow. It emerged without warning, a silhouette so vast it blotted out the stars behind it. The Erebus didn't glide into view like the Ascendant ships. It erupted, a jagged wound in reality, its hull a patchwork of black steel and glowing red scars that pulsed like veins. It was ugly, brutish, a thing forged in fire and hate rather than crafted with elegance. The Ascendants stared, their perfect composure faltering for the first time in centuries. This was no ship of theirs. This was something else, something wrong. "What is it?" Zeresh demanded, his voice losing its velvet edge as he turned to his sensor officer. The officer's fingers danced over the controls, his brow furrowing as the data streamed in. "Unknown origin," he replied, his tone clipped. "No match in our archives. It's massive, Larger than anything we've encountered, and it's powering weapons. Zaresh's lips curled into a sneer. Primitive, no doubt. Some forgotten race crawling out of the dirt to challenge us. Destroy it. The order was given, and the light of divinity hummed with energy as its cannons locked onto the intruder. Beams of searing white light lanced through the void, each one capable of vaporizing a moon. The crew watched, expecting the shadow to erupt in a satisfying burst of debris. Instead, the beams struck and vanished. No explosion, no damage, just a faint shimmer across the Erebus's hull, as if it had swallowed the attack whole. A murmur of unease rippled through the bridge. Zaresh's sneer faded, replaced by a flicker of something he hadn't felt in eons. Uncertainty. Before he could speak, the Erebus responded. It didn't fire beams or missiles. It roared. A sound that wasn't sound. A wave of raw, primal fury that slammed into the Ascendant fleet like a physical blow. Subspace screamed with it, a cacophony of rage and defiance that drowned out their systems and set their ships trembling. On the bridge, officers clutched their ears, blood trickling from their noses as the noise tore through their minds. Zaresh staggered, his silver eyes wide, his perfect mask shattered. And then the voice came. "You call yourselves gods," it boomed, low and guttural, resonating through every deck of every ship. It wasn't a transmission, it was a violation, a presence that clawed its way into their skulls. "Look upon us and no despair." The Erebus surged forward, its engines igniting with a red glare that bathed Kailara's ruins in a hellish light. Up close, its hull revealed more than scars. It was etched with names, thousands of them carved in jagged, uneven lines. Names of worlds, of people, of civilizations long erased by the Ascendant's wrath. This wasn't just a ship, it was a monument to their sins, a reckoning given form. Zaresh forced himself upright, his hands trembling as he gripped the command console. "Fire everything!" he shouted, his voice cracking. "Erase it from existence!" The fleet obeyed, unleashing a storm of light and plasma that lit the void like a second sun. The Erebus took it all, every shot, every blast, its hull glowing hotter but never breaking. And then it fired back. A single lance of crimson energy erupted from its bow, slicing through the radiant spear, the smallest of the dreadnoughts, like a knife through paper. The ship didn't explode, it unraveled, its pristine hull peeling apart in slow, grotesque tendrils before collapsing into a cloud of dust. The Ascendants watched in silence, their godlike certainty crumbling as the debris drifted past their view screens. On the light of divinity, Zaresh's breath came in shallow gasps. What are they?" he whispered, more to himself than anyone else. The answer came not from his crew, but from the Erebus. Its voice returned, colder now, laced with a bitter satisfaction. "We are the ones you forgot, the ones you burned, the ones you called weak." A pause, heavy with menace. "We are human." The word hung in the air, unfamiliar to most of the Ascendants. A myth, a footnote, a species erased so long ago it barely lingered in their oldest records. Yet here they were, not just alive, but angry, their warship a blade forged from the ashes of their past. Zaresh's mind raced, searching for a response, a plan, anything to reclaim control. But the Erebus didn't wait. It charged, its engines flaring as it bore down on the fleet. The Ascendants, for all their power, felt something they'd never known. Fear. They had called themselves gods, but gods don't bleed. And as the Erebus closed in, they began to realize they might. The Erebus didn't slow as it tore through the void, a juggernaut of wrath aimed straight at the Ascendant fleet. On the light of divinity, chaos erupted. Officers shouted over one another, their voices shrill with panic as the human warship closed the distance. Zaresh gripped the edge of his console, his silver eyes locked on the view screen, watching the red glow of the Erebus's engines grow brighter. The air tasted of metal and fear, a sensation so alien to him that it burned. "Shields to maximum," he barked, forcing his voice steady. "Redirect power from the secondary systems, everything to the cannons." The crew scrambled to obey, their movements jerky, their flawless coordination unraveling. The Erebus loomed larger now, its scarred hull filling the screen, those carved names glaring like accusations. Zaresh's mind churned. Humans, they'd said. A dead race, a trivial footnote. How could they wield something like this? How could they dare? The fleet fired again, a desperate barrage of light and energy that streaked across the void. The Erebus didn't flinch. Its hull shimmered, absorbing the onslaught, the red veins pulsing faster as if feeding on their attacks. Then it struck back, not with a single beam this time, but with a wave. A wall of crimson energy surged from its bow, slamming into the celestial wrath with a force that shook the stars. The dreadnought buckled, its elegant spires snapping like dry twigs before it imploded, a silent scream of light and debris. Zaresh's breath caught. 2 ships gone in minutes. His fleet, his invincible armada, was bleeding. "Evasive maneuvers!" he roared. But the Erebus was already moving, faster than anything that size should be. It pivoted with brutal precision, targeting the Eternal Grace. Missiles launched from its flanks, not sleek or refined, but crude, jagged things that screamed through space and detonated in bursts of molten shrapnel. The Grace's shields flared, then failed, and the ship tore apart in a cascade of fire. The voice came again, clawing into their minds. "You built your thrones on our graves." It was slower now, savoring each word. "Now watch them fall." Zaresh's hands shook. He'd never known defeat, never imagined it. But this was no battle. This was slaughter. "Who commands you?" he shouted into the void, his voice cracking. "Show yourself." The Erebus paused, its engines dimming, and for a moment, silence gripped the fleet. Then the view screen flickered, and a figure appeared. Human, unmistakably, scarred, weathered, eyes like blackened steel. "I am Admiral Kane," he said, his voice a low growl, "and this is humanity's answer." The screen went dark, and the Erebus charged again, its shadow swallowing the stars. The Erebus didn't hesitate after Kane's words. It surged toward the light of divinity, its jagged hull a nightmare bearing down on Zaresh's flagship. The Ascendant fleet was down to 2 ships now, their pristine elegance marred by fear and faltering resolve. On the bridge, the air buzzed with static and desperation. Zaresh's officers worked frantically, rerouting power, recalibrating weapons, anything to hold the line. But their hands trembled, and their silver eyes darted to their High Lord, seeking the certainty he could no longer give. "Target its core," Zaresh snapped, his voice hoarse. "There must be a weakness. Find it." The light of divinity unleashed a torrent of plasma, streams of white-hot fury that slammed into the Erebus. For a fleeting moment, hope flickered as the human ship's hull flared under the assault. But the glow faded, and the Erebus kept coming, unscathed, relentless. A low rumble shook the deck, and the voice returned, searing through their minds. "Weakness? You taught us to have none." Kane's tone dripped with venom, a promise of retribution centuries in the making. The Erebus fired again, not energy this time, but something worse. Grappling harpoons launched from its sides, massive barbed claws that punched through the Sovereign Dawn's hull with a sickening crunch. The dreadnought lurched, tethered to the human ship like prey caught in a trap. Zaresh watched, horrified, as the Erebus reeled its catch closer. Cables tightened, and the Dawn's pristine surface buckled, splitting open as if gutted. Sparks and bodies spilled into the void, ascendants, immortal no longer. The crew on the Light of Divinity froze, their godlike poise shattered by the sight of their kin dying like mortals. "Cut the feed!" Zeresh shouted, but it was too late. The Erebus's next move came without warning. Ports along its flank opened, disgorging swarms of smaller craft. Fighters, ugly and angular, moving with a ferocity the Ascendants couldn't comprehend. They descended on the Dawn, tearing into its wounds, their weapons crude but devastating. Explosions bloomed across the dreadnought's frame, and within moments it was gone, reduced to a drifting husk. Zaresh's chest heaved, his mind reeling. 3 ships lost. 3! The humans weren't fighting a war. They were waging annihilation. "Full retreat," he whispered, the words tasting like ash. "Signal the Empire. We need reinforcements, now." The officer at the comms hesitated, his fingers hovering over the controls. "High Lord, the subspace channels, they're jammed. It's them. They've cut us off." A chill ran through Zeresh. Trapped. Alone. The Erebus loomed closer, its red scars pulsing like a heartbeat. Kyne's voice returned, quieter now, almost intimate. "No gods to save you. Just us." The Light of Divinity shuddered as the human ship locked onto it, and Zeresh realized with dawning terror, this was only the beginning. The Light of Divinity groaned under the strain as the Erebus closed in, its shadow swallowing the last vestiges of hope on the Ascendant flagship. Zeresh stood rigid, his silver eyes reflecting the crimson glow seeping through the view screen. The bridge was a cacophony of alarms and shouted orders, but it all blurred into noise. His fleet, his pride, his proof of divinity, was gone, shredded by these humans, these ghosts from a past he'd never bothered to remember. Now, it was just him and the Erebus, and the weight of that truth crushed him. "Fire the reserves!" he roared, slamming a fist onto the console. "Everything we have! Hit them now!" The ship's cannons flared to life, spewing a desperate volley of energy that streaked toward the human warship. The Erebus didn't dodge or falter. It took the hits, its hull absorbing the barrage like a predator savoring a futile struggle. Then it retaliated. A pulse erupted from its core, not a weapon but a shockwave, a ripple of force that slammed into the Light of Divinity with the weight of a dying star. The ship lurched, its pristine decks splitting as bulkheads buckled. Officers screamed as they were thrown against walls, their bodies crumpling like paper. Zeresh clung to his station, blood trickling from his temple, his perfect form marred for the first time in centuries. Kyne's voice clawed into his skull again, relentless. "You thought us broken. You thought us dust." The words carried a weight beyond anger. Grief, forged into something sharper. "We built this from your ruins." The Erebus surged closer, its harpoons firing once more. They struck the Light of Divinity's flank, piercing deep, and the ship shuddered as the cables tightened, dragging it toward the human behemoth. Zaresh's mind raced, searching for an escape, a miracle. "Divert power to the engines!" he shouted, his voice ragged. "Break free, now!" The engines flared, straining against the pull, but the Erebus held firm, its grip unyielding. Sparks flew as the hull began to tear, metal screeching in protest. Through the chaos, the viewscreen flickered, and Kyne appeared again. His face was a map of scars, each line a story of loss and defiance. "You burned our worlds," he said, his voice low, steady. "You took our children, our homes, you called it order." He leaned closer, eyes blazing. "We call it war." The screen cut out, and the Erebus unleashed its fighters again. They swarmed the Light of Divinity, their weapons ripping into its defenses. Explosions rocked the bridge, and Zaresh fell to his knees, the taste of defeat bitter on his tongue. He'd called himself a god, but gods don't kneel. Yet here he was, broken as the humans, those he'd deemed beneath him, tore his world apart. The Erebus loomed, its scarred hull filling the void, and Zaresh knew his empire would hear of this, and it would tremble. The light of divinity trembled like a wounded animal, its once pristine hull now a jagged ruin of twisted metal and flickering lights. The Erebus held it fast, its harpoons embedded deep, cables taut as they reeled the ascendant flagship closer to its scarred maw. On the bridge, Zaresh pulled himself to his feet, his silver eyes dim with exhaustion and fury. Blood streaked his face, a crimson insult to his divine facade, and his hands shook as he gripped the shattered remnants of his command console. The air was thick with smoke and the acrid scent of burning circuits, the cries of his crew a distant echo beneath the relentless hum of the human warship. "Status," he barked, his voice raw, barely audible over the chaos. An officer, young, her pristine uniform torn, stumbled toward him, her face pale with terror. "Shields are down, High Lord," she stammered. "Engines at critical. We're losing her." Her words faltered as another explosion rocked the ship, sending a shower of sparks cascading from the ceiling. Zaresh's gaze snapped to the view screen, where the Erebus loomed, its red-veined hull pulsing like a living thing, a beast savoring its prey. He'd never known powerlessness. For millennia, he'd bent galaxies to his will, crushed rebellions with a whisper, watched worlds kneel at his feet. Now he was the one cornered, his empire's might reduced to this single, failing ship. And the humans, those vermin he'd dismissed as extinct, were the ones holding the blade. The irony gnawed at him, a bitter poison seeping into his bones. Kane's voice returned, cutting through the noise like a knife. "You hear it, don't you?" It rasped, low and deliberate, burrowing into Zaresh's mind. "The silence of your gods." The words carried a weight that made his chest tighten, a mockery laced with truth. Zaresh clenched his fists, nails digging into his palms as he glared at the screen. The human's scarred face flickered into view again, unyielding, his eyes burning with a fire Zaresh couldn't comprehend. "You're nothing," Zaresh spat, his voice trembling with defiance. "A shadow of a dead race, clinging to vengeance. You think this changes anything?" He forced a laugh, sharp and hollow, but it died in his throat as the Erebus responded. Not with words, but with action. A new weapon emerged from its hull, a massive cannon unfolding like a predator's jaw, its barrel glowing with a sickly green light. The air on the bridge grew heavy, the crew's breaths catching as the weapon charged. "High Lord, it's targeting us!" the officer cried, her voice breaking. "Energy readings are off the scale. We can't—" Her warning was cut short as the cannon fired. A beam of emerald energy lanced through the void, striking the light of Divinity's bow. The ship screamed, a sound of rending metal and fracturing hope, as the beam carved through its hull, slicing off a third of its length in a single, brutal stroke. The severed section drifted away, a lifeless husk spilling debris and bodies into the darkness. Zaresh staggered, the deck tilting beneath him. He caught himself against a railing, his vision swimming as the reality sank in. His ship, his sanctuary, was dying. The Erebus pressed its advantage, its fighters swarming the wound, their weapons tearing deeper into the flagship's guts. Explosions blossomed across the view screen, each one a dagger to Zaresh's pride. Kane's voice returned, softer now, almost pitying. "You took everything from us. Our homes, our future, our names." A pause, heavy with memory. "We took them back." The Erebus surged closer, its shadow engulfing the light of Divinity, and Zaresh felt it, a chill that wasn't just fear, but something deeper, something primal. Regret. He'd burned their worlds, yes. He'd erased them from history, convinced they were beneath notice. But they hadn't forgotten. They'd built this monstrosity, this Erebus from the ashes he'd left behind. And now it was here, a mirror reflecting every sin he'd buried. The cannon charged again, its green glow casting an eerie light across the bridge, and Zaresh knew. This was no longer a battle. This was judgment. The Erebus fired, and the light of divinity shattered, its divine light snuffed out by the wrath of those it had forsaken. The light of divinity was no longer a ship. It was a carcass, its hull split open, bleeding fire and debris into the void. The bridge, once a gleaming testament to ascendant supremacy, was now a graveyard of shattered consoles and broken bodies. Zaresh clung to life amid the wreckage, his silver eyes clouded with dust and despair. The green beam from the Erebus had torn through the ship's heart, leaving it adrift, its engines silent, its crew reduced to whispers and moans. He crawled through the chaos, his pristine robes shredded, his hands slick with blood. His own, for once. The viewscreen flickered, its cracked surface struggling to hold an image. Through the static, the Erebus loomed, its scarred hull a silent accusation, its red veins pulsing with a rhythm that mocked his faltering pulse. Zaresh's breath came in ragged gasps, each one a battle against the smoke choking the air. He'd lost everything, his fleet, his ship, his illusion of divinity. And yet the humans weren't done. They wanted more than his defeat. They wanted his soul. Kane's voice slithered into his mind again, unbidden, inescapable. You thought power was yours alone. It was calm now, a predator's patience, each word a nail in Zaresh's coffin. We learned it from you, then made it ours. The Erebus shifted, its massive form aligning with the light of divinity's ruins, and a new sound pierced the silence, a low, grinding roar as docking clamps extended from its underside. They latched onto the flagship's remains with a jolt that threw Zaresh to the floor, metal screeching as the human ship began to pull them in. He clawed his way to his feet, panic surging through him. "No," he rasped, his voice a shadow of its former command. "Not like this." He stumbled toward the weapons console, or what was left of it, fingers fumbling over dead controls. A surviving officer, his face half burned, grabbed his arm. "High Lord, we're breached," he croaked. "They're boarding." Zaresh's head snapped toward the corridor beyond the bridge. The distant clang of boots echoed through the ship, growing louder, closer. Humans. Not their machines, not their weapons, but them, coming to finish what their warship had started. He drew his ceremonial blade, a useless relic now, its edge dulled by centuries of peace, and turned to face the inevitable. The first humans emerged from the smoke, shadows in battered armor, their faces obscured by visors streaked with ash. They moved with purpose, weapons raised, crude, ugly things, nothing like the Ascendant's elegant tools of war. Yet they'd won. Zaresh raised his blade, a final act of defiance, but a shot rang out, and it clattered from his hand, his wrist screaming with pain. He fell to his knees, disarmed, defenseless. A figure stepped forward, taller than the rest, his armor marked with a single red stripe. He removed his helmet, revealing Coin's scarred face, those blackened steel eyes boring into Zaresh. "You don't get to die yet," Kane said, his voice low, steady. "Not until you see." "See what?" Zaresh spat, blood dripping from his lips. "Your vengeance? Your petty triumph?" Kane crouched, meeting his gaze. "Not ours. Theirs." He gestured to the soldiers behind him, their visors lifting one by one. Faces, Human faces stared back, each one etched with loss, with rage, with a fire Zaresh had never understood. They weren't just warriors. They were survivors. The remnants of worlds he'd burned, lives he'd erased. "You thought us gone," Kine said, rising. "But we remembered. Every name, every scream." He turned to his crew. "Take him." Hands seized Zaresh, dragging him through the wreckage, his protests drowned by the clamor of their boots. The Erebus swallowed them, its corridors dark and jagged, walls carved with more names, millions of them, a litany of the dead. Zaresh's strength failed, his body limp in their grasp. But his mind screamed. This wasn't defeat, this was damnation. And as they pulled him deeper into the ship, he realized. The humans hadn't just returned. They'd come to rewrite the stars. The Erebus's belly was a labyrinth of shadow and steel, its corridors a maze of jagged edges and flickering red light. Zaresh's captors dragged him through it, their grip ironclad, their silence deafening. His legs scraped against the rough floor, his once regal form reduced to a broken husk, blood and grime streaking his silver skin. The air was thick with the stench of oil and rust, a far cry from the sterile perfection of his lost flagship. But it wasn't the ship that chilled him. It was the names. They covered every wall, every panel, etched in crude, angry strokes. Tarsus, Elira, Vion. Worlds he'd crushed, lives he'd erased, each one a wound staring back at him. Kine led the way, his armored figure a dark beacon in the gloom, his steps deliberate, unhurried. The other humans followed, their faces, those he'd glimpsed, burned into Zaresh's mind. They weren't just soldiers, they were ghosts, resurrected from the ashes of his conquests. He'd never seen their kind as anything but insects, insignificant specks beneath his divine heel. Now they towered over him, their rage a palpable force that pressed against his chest. They stopped in a vast chamber, its ceiling lost in darkness, its walls lined with more names, too many to count. The floor was stained, dark patches glinting wetly under the dim light. Zaresh's stomach churned as he realized what it was. Blood, old and new, a testament to something he couldn't yet grasp. Kine turned, his scarred face unreadable, and nodded to his crew. They released Zaresh, letting him collapse onto the cold metal, his breath shallow, his body screaming with pain. "Stand," Kane said, his voice a quiet command. Zaresh didn't move, defiance flickering faintly in his chest. A boot slammed into his ribs, and he gasped, curling inward as agony flared. "Stand," Kane repeated, colder now. With trembling limbs, Zaresh obeyed, rising unsteadily, his silver eyes locked on the human's unrelenting gaze. "You think this is justice?" Zaresh rasped, his voice brittle. "Torturing me? Killing me? It changes nothing. My empire will—" "Your empire," Kine cut in, stepping closer, "is a lie built on bones." He gestured to the chamber, the names, the blood. "This isn't about you. It's about them." From the shadows, figures emerged, more humans, dozens of them, their faces gaunt, their eyes hollow but alive with a fire that made Zaresh flinch. They wore rags, their bodies marked with scars, their hands clutching makeshift weapons. Survivors. Not soldiers, but the ones who'd lived through his purges, who'd crawled from the rubble he'd left behind. A woman stepped forward, her hair matted, her voice trembling with fury. "You burned Elira," she said, pointing a shaking finger at him. "My daughter was 6. She screamed for me as your ships turned her to ash." Another man, older, his face a map of grief, spoke next. "Tarsus. My whole village. Gone in a night. You didn't even know our names." Zaresh's mouth opened, but no words came. He'd never heard their voices, never cared to. They'd been numbers, resources, obstacles. Now they surrounded him, a chorus of pain and hate, their stories crashing over him like waves. Coin watched, silent, as the survivors closed in, their hands reaching, their eyes promising retribution. "You'll see," Kane said, his voice a low growl. "Every world you took, every life you stole, they're here, and they remember." He stepped back, and the crowd surged forward. Zaresh screamed as they seized him, their fingers digging into his flesh, their voices rising in a roar of anguish and rage. He fought, weakly, but there were too many, their strength born of suffering he'd inflicted. They dragged him toward a platform at the chamber's center, its surface stained with more blood, its purpose clear. Zaresh's mind fractured, terror swallowing his pride. He'd called himself a god, but gods don't beg. Yet as the humans raised their weapons, he did. And the Erebus echoed with their cries, a requiem for the divine. The platform in the Erebus's blood-stained chamber was cold beneath Zaresh's knees, its surface slick with the ghosts of those who'd come before him. The survivors' hands held him down, their grip unrelenting, their voices a storm of grief and fury that drowned his pleas. His silver eyes darted wildly, searching for an escape that didn't exist, his once divine composure shattered into 1,000 jagged pieces. Above him, the names on the walls loomed, a silent jury bearing witness to his end. He'd ruled galaxies, crushed worlds with a thought. But here, in the belly of this human warship, he was nothing. Kine stood at the edge of the platform, his scarred face a mask of cold resolve, his blackened steel eyes fixed on Zaresh. The survivors pressed closer, their makeshift weapons, shards of metal, broken tools, gleaming in the dim light. The woman from Elira stepped forward again, her trembling hands clutching a jagged blade. "For my daughter," she whispered, her voice breaking as she raised it high. Zaresh's scream was cut short as the blade fell, biting into his shoulder, blood spraying across the platform. Pain seared through him, raw and mortal, and he thrashed against their hold, but they were too many, too strong. The old man from Tarsus was next, his weathered hands steady as he drove a rusted spike into Zaresh's side. "For my village," he growled, twisting it deeper. Zaresh's vision blurred, his breath coming in wet, choking gasps. One by one, they took their turn, each strike a name, a memory, a debt repaid. His body became a canvas of their vengeance, his blood mingling with the stains beneath him, his godhood bleeding out with every blow. Kine watched in silence, his presence a steady anchor amid the chaos. When the last survivor stepped back, panting, their weapons dripping, Zaresh was a ruin, alive, barely, his chest heaving, his silver eyes dull with agony. The chamber fell quiet, the air heavy with the weight of what they'd done. Coin stepped onto the platform, his boots ringing against the metal, and crouched beside the fallen High Lord. "You thought us weak," he said, his voice low, almost gentle. "You thought us gone. But we endured. We built this—" He gestured to the Erebus, its scarred hull a testament to their survival. "From the ashes you left us." He leaned closer, his breath warm against Zaresh's ear. "Your empire will fall. Not today, not tomorrow, but it will. And when it does, they'll know who broke it." Zaresh's lips moved, a faint whisper escaping. "Kill me. Please." His voice was a broken thing, a plea from a man who'd never known mercy until he needed it. Coin shook his head. "Number you live. You carry this back to your kind." He stood, turning to his crew. "Patch him up. Send him home." The survivors murmured, some protesting, but Coin's gaze silenced them. "Death's too easy. Let him tell them what he's seen." They obeyed, dragging Zaresh's mangled form away, his blood trailing behind him. Hours later, A battered escape pod launched from the Erebus, limping toward Ascendant space, carrying a message in flesh and ruin. The warship turned, its engines flaring red as it vanished into the void, leaving Kailara's ashes behind. On the Erebus's bridge, Coin stood alone, staring at the stars. The names on the walls whispered to him, millions of voices, quiet now, but not at peace. They'd won this battle, broken a god, but the war was far from over. He touched a scar on his cheek, a memory of a world lost, and clenched his fist. The Ascendants would come again, stronger, angrier, but so would humanity. The Erebus sailed on, a shadow among the stars, its hull scarred but unbowed. They'd called themselves gods once, the Ascendants. Now they'd witnessed something greater, the wrath of those they'd forgotten, and the universe, vast and indifferent, trembled at the sound of humanity's return.